Hi, everyone. I'm here with our friend David Higbee, and David is a translator by trade, I believe, right? He speaks many different languages, Japanese, Spanish, right? And I got to know him through music, though, and I don't remember how we originally connected that way, but maybe you remember.
I don't remember actually. I think I was just looking for musicians for collaborations.
Right,
Translation and interpretation, um, and those kinds of projects tend to be what pays more these days.
right.
But I've done paid music work for a while as well. So I really consider myself a musician at heart. That it's tough to make a real living on music in Los Angeles unless you hit it big, which I haven't yet. But I'm still doing it. I'm still embracing the dream. So
I know you
talk
are. I
about
read all your posts. And he's very talented, and he has that
oh,
great little
thank you.
studio in your house.
I appreciate that.
Um, but today we wanted to talk about Proposition 22 because amongst all of his talents, David is also very knowledgeable about Prop 22, right? And I was reading all your posts, so I wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about it because,
Thank you. Thanks for following my posts. Yeah,
yeah,
it's been an interesting year. We've had some interesting times in California, and I think we've all come to some interesting realizations that maybe, and I think this probably goes for everyone all over the U.S. and maybe
If you like our videos, go ahead and click on like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
and maybe even all over the world. That what we thought was going to work out and was going to be in our best interest, we then realized maybe it wasn't, or
hmm
we've maybe matured a little bit and realized that our thinking was a little bit too simplistic before, and now we've got to evolve a little bit and adopt a little bit more of a nuanced uh, you know line of thinking about everything that's going on in the world. But yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff has happened, and of course there's the C word. But there's also so many other things that happen in California, and those things together have really, I think, opened our eyes here. So for musicians and translators and interpreters and pretty much everyone else as well. So
yeah. Why were you so for Proposition 22? Um, I thought I'd.
yeah, that's
Well,
a great.
I
Yeah,
want to
Oh,
know
yeah.
how.
Let's explain what it is, right?
we
Well,
can,
listen,
right, yeah,
I want to know what your credentials are. Um,
sure. Yeah.
what brought you to being an expert on this, I guess.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm an expert on it.
Okay.
I definitely have what I consider to be a well-founded opinion,
Okay.
but Prop 22 came up in response to another law, which was AB 5.
Right.
Without AB 5, there would be no Prop 22, and AB 5 came up in response to another not law but a court decision called Dynamics or
Mm-hmm.
Dynamics, and Dynamics came up in response to the growing trend for gig workers and for independent contractors to be
Sure.
hired as opposed to employees. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so there's been this growing elephant in the room for a while now about gig workers, and which it's a legitimate concern that they were trying to tackle, but they ended up doing where they might have needed some a fine-tuned chisel to kind of chip away a little bit at the California statute of labor laws. They took a sledgehammer to it and said, we're just going to crack this thing up. So that's basically what happened, and that's how I got involved. And again, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I started I joined the advocacy efforts on behalf of both musicians and translators and interpreters, joined some PR campaigns, started going to rallies, started, reading up on, well, I guess the first thing is I actually read the law, which a lot of people didn't. Oh, I have a weird hair like sticking up.
I get that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is a lot of people would have knee-jerk reactions to this or that law, but they didn't, they haven't actually read it. And as a legal translator and interpreter that works with the courts, uh, at least half time, that's kind of one of my mainstays. I'm really interested in laws, how they play out, when they're broken, what happens. And then I would usually be the guy who's there, between the judge and, someone who doesn't speak English, helping them understand what's going on.
Hmm.
And so, I'm very interested in laws in general, but this law, it just seems so unjust. It seems so ridiculous the way that it came about, and then the effects of it as well, not just on me personally, but also on the arts, particularly in California. The arts, were really, really hit hard by AB5, and then they were hit even harder by COVID-19. But what a lot of people don't understand is that before COVID-19 really hit that big first wave, the arts were already under attack here in California. And I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but the unintended consequences of AB5 were that it was going to be so much harder to be a musician and make any money at all at it, because they wanted us all to be employees. That was the intent of AB5, is that everyone wants to be an employee, and we're going to create a law that makes it so that everyone should be an employee, and so that companies have a really hard time hiring anyone in any other capacity that is not as an employee of the company, that ends up paying into state coffers as well. And of course, the state doesn't want to lose tax revenue. That was another factor, but it really was kind of a perfect storm for a lot of professions. And for musicians, it was a huge debacle. Same as for my other two professions, interpreting and translation. So that's kind of my involvement on AB5, and why I feel like I at least have a well-founded position on AB5 and on Prop 22. And I guess to some extent, I that kind of kicked off me feeling like, oh, I really want to understand, what these other laws are going to do. And I started to look into the other propositions and everything else, and it just brought me to some realizations that things are a little bit more complex than we'd like to believe sometimes. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much it for me. I don't
Well, I
know.
would say you're more of an expert than probably a lot of people, most people. Like you said, most people don't even read these bills, and that's one of my pet peeves. And I'm in Wyoming, so I'm kind of removed from this, but I've done a lot of gig working myself when I was in LA for like 30 years.
Right, I'm
So,
sure.
what, yeah, I'm on the fence. I'm curious because as an actor or musician, you want the option of picking up gigs here and there and kind of making your
Right.
own schedule and
Mhm.
not being bound by rules of employment. So I understand that kind of freedom, but then on the other hand, you're not being taken care of. You're not getting your benefits. They're not paying into your social security, and you're responsible for all of that. So what I was reading about the Prop 22 is that they were saying, so it passed, right? Everybody was for
Right.
Prop
Mhm.
22, which allows people to remain
Yep.
independent
by
contractors,
by
right?
58%.
Okay.
And let's be clear, Prop 22 really was looking at a very small slice of that pie, because we're looking at all independent contractors. And by the way, I was an Uber driver for a short time as well, and so there was that aspect of it that I thought, well, I like being an Uber driver. If I have nothing else going on,
Right.
I can pick up some work, and I want to work some extra hours, or I need to I need to invest in another piece of studio gear. And, and I happen to be on the road. I mean, I am in a very unique situation, because I would go up to work in Santa Clara County, which is basically Silicon Valley, in San Jose, and I'd be there working for the courts. But, at night, if I don't have any friends, I'm not just gonna go, back to my hotel and watch movies. I'm the kind of guy that just I want to get out there. I want to get to know people. I want to interact. I want to network. And so for me, driving Uber at night while I was working in the courts during the day, for me and it was a great, it was a break from what was the norm for me. It was kind of a social moment. I could drive around listening to music,
Mhm.
pick up people in my car. I could kind of, I could explore San Jose and Silicon Valley, and I actually did. It really helped me get to know the area a lot better. But the reason I had that is because I wanted to do something else and maybe make a little bit of money on the side, and I didn't need benefits because I was making enough as an independent contractor with the courts where I, paid for my own insurance and
Mhm.
everything else like that. So, but not everyone else is in that situation, right? There were Uber drivers who, you know, who they couldn't find other full-time work. And, being an Uber driver or Lyft driver was a very low barrier to entry. It was easy for them to get started. They just had to have a car that was, uh, within a certain age. You couldn't have a car that was too old, and have a driver's license with a decent driving record, and that's it. And then bam, you sign up and you go to the inspection, you get started, and you're rolling in a matter of like literally days. Suddenly you're like, oh, now I have this side business driving. And at that time, it was actually pretty good money. I mean, there were ebbs and flows. Of course, you would make more at peak hours and less at times when there was a lot of competition, a lot of other people out there wanting to drive and make some money on the side. But for me, it was more of an experiment because I had read an article about a guy in San Francisco who had a jewelry business on the side, and he would drive Uber, and he would actually make money selling his jewelry and selling, some of the other, items that he would design, that he would have them displayed there in his car. And then he kind of started. He became a professional Uber driver, and he had his own team of Uber drivers that were driving for him, and he was doing really well. And as an entrepreneur, I was really fascinated by that. How, starting as an Uber driver or something that you're not making a lot of money, and how you can find an angle that lets you innovate and provide another service. And I thought, as a musician, I wonder if musicians who are Uber drivers could find a unique angle where they are marketing their music and even the music of other people to their passengers, and maybe that could be a unique experience, because people, as Uber matured, people didn't just want a ride, they wanted an experience. They wanted, to see what amenities this driver had. And it's all about your rankings and keeping your rankings high, and so people would provide different amenities. And it was, and as a regular Uber consumer as well, when I wanted to go out with friends or things like that in the Los Angeles area, it was fascinating to see what kinds of amenities Uber drivers would provide. And so I said, I'm going to jump into this and kind of experiment and see what happens. And so that's how I got into the driver side of things, to kind of see, and I could see the perspective of drivers, that there are drivers that, they were super creative, that were super innovative. And there were drivers that, they just wanted a paycheck and that's it. And I think it's important to emphasize with both. But Prop 22 was only looking at a very small percent of Uber drivers. Well, it was actually putting everyone, all Uber drivers, in this very small category, which is all of these poor drivers are being exploited and they all want benefits. And some of them definitely did want benefits and wanted employment. Um, but the question is were the laws at that time sufficient to protect those people? And a lot of attorneys thought that they were. But of course, the people who were behind AB5 said, no, those aren't sufficient, because we've had some abuses, and in fact, we're just gonna get rid of the possibility for any abuses at all, and now we're going to force everyone to become an employee unless you pass these really narrow, really oversimplified test, the ABC test. And Uber drivers got swept up in that. So did translators, so did interpreters, so did musicians, so did writers. I mean, Vice wrote an article on AB5, 6 months before it went into effect. And then famously, once it went into effect, all the writers that wrote the article got fired because Vice could no longer justify hiring writers as independent contractors. Because of the law, they now had to hire them as employees. And guess what? Writers don't necessarily want to be employees of a company.
Mm-hmm.
No,
So
David,
there are lines of work that AB5 was good for and lines of work that it wasn't for. And Prop 22 was one step to fix that, right? to help drivers, to try to, instead of going back to the way things were, and instead of going forward and doing something that was pretty drastic, which was AB5 and making everyone employees, Prop 22 said, let's take everyone and create a third category of employment where if you are an independent contractor and you want to be an independent contractor, but you're doing this kind of gig work, you'll have a third category of employment or of status where the company that's hiring you will pay you some benefits, but you're not an employee, right? So they're
So
basically
basically,
giving some concessions.
basically Prop 22 just carved out that third little section for the independent contractors.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
That's good to hear, because I know a lot of my friends who are what you'd call pro-union types I feel like they were against Proposition 22.
Right. They had to be. I mean, the
Yeah.
unions had to be against it. You couldn't be in a union and come out as being against Prop 22 because AB5 really was the union's baby.
Mm.
And I understand. I actually understand that. My grandfather was actually a huge, he was super into unions. He helped the steel workers in the area that I grew up which was a completely different state, unionize and get really good benefits. And he, and that was his deal. He loved that. And I actually think, workers definitely need to, the unions have done a lot for workers in the United States. And, Mexico hasn't had unions, at least not at the level that we have. And, a lot of Mexican, workers will work 12-hour days and, there are abuses. And so I'm thankful for, for the progress that unions have brought us. The issue is that when unions start telling everyone that they speak for all workers, and they start saying, well, we are going to be the authorities and tell legislators how to pass laws to protect independent contractors, there's a conflict of interest there because unions cannot speak for independent contractors and they don't speak for independent contractors. The only capacity in which they would reasonably want to speak for independent contractors is to get rid of them so that they can become employees, because we have to be honest about this. Independent contractors are not unionizable, not under our current anti-monopoly laws or our antitrust laws. So there's a conflict of interest there that I think no one really saw, this freight train coming. And once it hit, we were like, why didn't we see this before? But yeah, that's basically what it was with AB5 and Prop 22. Prop 22, it's not perfect, but I think it definitely tried to give some concessions without saying, we're going to make everyone be an employee, and we're just going to that's all we're going to have now is just employees, and everyone's going to be employee of someone else, and there's no independent contractors allowed anymore, because that also would be a terrible thing for California and for the United States.
Right.
Well,
And I know a lot of people are going to be I have been watching what happened with Prop 22 in other states, so
absolutely.
it's a very thing to watch.
Setting the tone for the future of labor, because
Right.
the truth is everything has changed. I mean,
Yep.
there are so many things that we need to examine and issues that we need to address as far as labor.
Sure.
And the fairness of it, and compensation and benefits.
There already were, but now it's even more.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
It's time, and it's coming. It's just all of these things are tied together. So that's why sometimes they propose one issue and it fails a lot of times, because standing on its own without all the other legs to stand on, it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can pair it with the whole, we just need a whole overhaul of our labor system.
We absolutely do. We need to update it. We need to modernize it. We need to modernize our laws. But this is, I think, an underlying issue that has to do with all of our our bills that are currently being proposed, both in California and at the national level, and also all the propositions that we had in California, all our ballot propositions, right? If you are facing a drastically different landscape, let's say that disruptive innovation someone invents a technology or a product or a new service or a new way of working that makes it completely different. Everything that you were doing up to that point is obsolete. Is it the role of lawmakers to go in there and say, okay, I'm the expert on this, and we know exactly what's going on in this industry and exactly what's going on all over our economy, and we're going to make all the decisions here without input of actual experts?
The
Right.
employees, the people who are doing the work, I mean, they need to be included in the decisions. They need to be brought
That's
to the
true.
table.
Right.
And
Definitely.
the people that are most affected by it. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Honestly, I think AB5 should have been a ballot proposition. They should have asked people, what do you think we should do about this? But most Californians had no idea what was going on with AB5. And basically they just kind of tried to jump on the bandwagon of Dynamics and say, well, now there's a legal precedent out there that says that you can't, fire employees and make them independent contractors. Why don't we just, creatively craft a law that takes that language and applies it to every single industry and makes it so that no one can hire independent contractors as easily as they could before. And honestly, it's if you are a politician and someone gives you that proposal, you're going to jump on it. If someone says, you know what, I know this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but we can get you more money in state coffers, and we can solve the dwindling or dying union issue, all with one amazing law that makes it almost impossible for anyone to be an independent contractor, you're going to jump on it. And so, I probably would have too. The issue is, who are the experts that are calling the shots? And did the people of California, did the independent contractors even have a chance? And I think there was a very short time set apart for testimonies and people to come in and voice their opinion on it, but no one was allowed to testify that wasn't in a union. So if you are not in a union, you could not even voice your opinion when they were drafting AB5 and voting on what the changes should be. And honestly, that's where the backlash came from. And so the success of Prop 22 is, in a way, it reflects that people just felt absolutely violated. They just felt totally railroaded. And, that this was, the world was pulled over our eyes and we were given absolutely no chance until it was basically too late. And so, I think Prop 22, there were two things going on. There were definitely Uber drivers who said, I want the flexibility. There were Uber drivers that said, actually, I want to be an employee, and everyone has the right to vote, according to their own conscience. But then you had other people who said, Prop 22 will take a big chunk out of AB5. It will basically eliminate the main premise of it, because AB5 was supposedly for Uber and Lyft drivers and DoorDash drivers and all of that. But everyone knew that Prop 22 would take a chunk out of it and basically maim the law, make it not quite as harmful. And in effect it did. And I don't know, personally, I have my own opinion about the effects of Prop 22. I think that creating a third category could be complex, could be complicated, but I think it's probably necessary moving forward, because it's a little bit complicated. The way that we've been working, it's maybe a little bit too dumbed down. But then again, the ABC test of AB5 was trying to dumb it down in the other direction. Say, literally, you have three tests, and if you can pass all those tests, you're an interpreter, or I'm sorry, you're an independent contractor. You can be an independent contractor, and if you are not, then you are automatically an employee. That's also a little bit too simplified for my
Well,
taste.
what are those tests? Let's explain things to
yeah.
people that are watching that most are not going to know what we're talking about.
Sure. And it's interesting because there are professions that these tests work very well for. And your traditional unionizable workers, factory workers, office workers, grocery store workers. I mean, anything your job is really not that niche and not that, not that specialized. It's those are jobs that I think unions have done a lot of good for. But there are niche jobs that unions just don't understand, and neither do politicians. And so when you create a really simplified test like the ABC test, and I'll actually tell you what it is right now. Uh, it is prong A. The first test is the A test, is that the individual is free from the control and direction of the hiring company when they are performing whatever service they're performing, right? And the B test is that the service that's being performed by the independent contractor is outside of the normal course of business of the hiring entity. It actually says of the employer. So it's assuming that everyone's an employee already, uh, even though I would have said, outside of the course of business of the hiring company. And then the C test is that that individual is customarily engaged or normally engaged in an independently established trade or occupation or profession or business that's the same as the service that they're performing for the company that's hiring them, right? So what happens is if you are working, if you're doing something like factory work, right? You're working at the factory every day of your life. You are, that's your full-time job basically, and you're not getting any benefits because you're being hired as an independent contractor, and tax revenue is being lost because you're supposed to pay your own taxes because as an independent contractor, and maybe that's a little bit more difficult. Maybe you don't know how taxes work because you're not a tax accountant, and maybe you don't have the money to pay an accountant, so that money's lost for the state. And you don't get benefits because you're not an employee of the company and they're not obligated to provide you with those benefits. In that kind of a situation, I think it's very common, or it's very natural for a union to say, well, these people, they're doing this work for this company. The company is operating based on the sweat and labor of these workers. They deserve some kind of benefits, and they want benefits, and they want to be employees, but the companies, it's just out of economic interest that that's not happening. So there's that situation. And then there's a situation of a more niche job, like a musician, right? So you have a musician that maybe has a weekly gig at a local bar. Go in and set up your gear, that you purchased with your own money. Sing 2 or 3 hours of songs. Maybe, and also you bring in a special guest musician and a vocalist to come sing with you. And so since you are there at the location of the restaurant, under this test, you have to be an employee of that restaurant, which is why musicians started losing all of their jobs, all of their projects, all of their paid work, even before COVID started in California. And the ones that didn't were restaurants that said, you know what, we're going to pay you under the table. We're just going to ignore this whole thing and act like it doesn't exist. And but a lot of musicians lost their work. And then you had
So wait, that was the result of AB5?
That was the result of AB5, right?
Okay. And then
Right.
Proposition 22 has kind of backed that up, or?
And Proposition 22 has said, well, for those situations where actually not in the situation, Prop 22 has helped musicians in the sense that it has made it so that basically the bite of AB5 is dulled. It's taken away. It makes it easier for everyone else to say, actually, these industries got an exemption. Actually, Uber and Lyft even now have an exemption. They don't even have to follow AB5 anymore. And if they don't have to do it, then we don't have to do it. The musicians did get an exemption that lets musicians that are earning a certain amount of money, they're working a certain number of hours per week, at one specific venue, to not have to be employees of that venue. The musicians got together And despite what the union wanted, because the AFM also wanted, everyone to be unionized, and they don't want jobs to be out there that aren't union jobs for musicians. But the reality is that AFM musicians always take dark days. I mean, if you're an AFM musician, you're not. You might be making 90%. If you're lucky, you might make 90% of what you make, at union jobs, orchestras, these scores that are going on Hollywood movies. But then there's another 10% of work that they lose if they can't. And so, and then you have your, musicians that are taking occasional union jobs that are doing a lot of, independent contractor work. So that situation is helped indirectly by Prop 22. Who it benefits from it directly, in my opinion, are the drivers who want to remain independent, uh, and who really did not want to be employees of Uber or Lyft, which, according to some estimates, is as high as 75% of all Uber drivers. And I'm not an authority. I didn't actually do my own research on that. I've just read a lot of research and a lot of statistics. And so those people are really helped by Prop 22. The other professions, Prop 22 doesn't affect us directly, but it does open the doors for us to say, actually, this law was, the reason for this law coming into existence was, Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and those gig workers, and now they're exempted from it. But we still have to, we've lost all of our contracts with agencies. And so, please help me out. Can you please give us an exemption? And there are other professions that are going to be working on getting an exemption from AB5 that didn't. Interpreters and translators did get a partial exemption, but only if you're certified and if you have a business license and if you can, prove that you are your own independent business. So things have changed, and some of those things might be good going forward. The question is whether COVID-19 is the best time to be restructuring an economy. But it's in the past. At least Prop 22 is in the past. It passed. AB5 is in the past. It's here to stay. The exemptions that come out, hopefully they will be for the benefit of everyone and for the benefit of our economy in general. But I think Prop 22 is significant in that sense. It's also significant in the sense that I think a lot of Californians realized that we need balance. You cannot have one party that's calling all the shots without any checks and balances, without risking, slowly sinking or quickly sinking into, a dictatorship at the state level. So,
Well, and one of my, I guess, pet peeves is that we have politicians that are trying to make laws that suit everyone. And we're all so different in our dreams and hopes and what we're looking for and our skills and our talents. Not everybody has the same skills. Not everybody's as motivated.
Exactly.
Not everybody wants, this or that. We're so different. And that's what's great about America. And to try to make all these blanket laws to put us all in a box, whether it's get married and have 2 children or stay single your whole life. Like, the American dream at one time was the white picket fence and you get married and you have 2 kids.
Right.
But now, we're realizing as women have become emancipated, we make different choices sometimes. And, it's not exactly.
And the laws still benefit, married couples for
Mhm.
sure, at least for the taxes.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
And many things, but as a culture and as a society, we have to decide, do we want to let people have more freedom? Because we claim that we want people to have freedom, but
Right.
then we also try to make it like, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that. And this is the rule for everyone. And so I like the idea that we're doing this. I was an independent contractor at the colleges when I was in Los Angeles. I taught at all the colleges, and
Oh, great.
that was an independent contractor. And I made a lot more money than I would have made being an employer because
Right.
my
And
own
that's,
business.
that's the other side is that, a lot of Uber drivers that didn't want AB5 to apply to them, that got exempted, or partially thanks to Prop 22. A lot of them realized really quickly that someone has to pay for benefits for all the drivers. And if you're getting benefits, you can't be making the same amount of money that you were making before, because that money's coming from somewhere. Either your customers are paying more, which means you're getting less customers, which means Uber is going to be able to hire less drivers. And that is exactly what happened. Even after Prop 22, the amount of people that Uber could take on board and that could support and give them enough volume of work to sustain a business as a driver has dropped significantly. And of course, the pandemic didn't help. But even before the pandemic, the number of people that were willing to pay the extra fees dropped, unfortunately. And you could say, well, people should be willing to pay for other people's benefits, but the drivers who didn't want that, and that liked the flexible working style of Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and all of that, they lost out. So it's a matter of, it may have, AB5 plus Prop 22 probably benefited some people. There were definitely people that lost from it. The question, the big thing is exactly what you said, is that, different strokes for different folks. People have, their goals, and, adults can make their own decisions, and hopefully are making informed decisions. And I personally don't think it's up to lawmakers to say, we know what's best for everyone, and we're going to force that down everyone's throats. I would say, at least do some studies, bring some economists on. I mean, something like AB5 needed to have, several years of solid research and solid recommendations and economists and freelancers, behind it. I think it was, done quick and easy so that they could try to get it into place, and, keep getting those union donations, which are powerful, and unions have their place, but they don't speak for independent contractors. So they don't speak for me. And when we have antitrust laws that allow unions to speak for independent contractors, then I would like to say, well, then why don't you start actually doing something for the independent contractors instead of taking work away from us? So that's my take on it. And, on AB5 and Prop 22, I do think it's a viable third option. I think it will lead to good things in the future. It's also imperfect at this point and needs to be updated for sure. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thanks, David, for coming on. I know we're going to run out of time here, so maybe we can have you back another time.
Sure,
yeah, and
sure.
you are quite the expert. Yeah, thank you.
I tend to talk a lot. I didn't even say 50% of everything that I thought, we might talk about this or talk about that, but I'd be glad to join you anytime.
Yes, you're
even if I'm not an expert, who knows?
Well, yeah, you know what? That's what we're just trying to get people to think too with this show. I mean, sometimes it's just about entertainment and having some fun. And when we have topics like this, we just want people to think and, share their thoughts, because we want there to be more options in the world.
Right. Yeah. And you can be entertained. You can be entertained and talk about and think at the same time.
That's true.
Maybe I'll write a song about AB5.
We're trying to get people to realize that.
Yeah. And you're a great mix of all of the jobs that are affected by, AB5. So you were a good person to talk to.
Yeah. Thanks so much, David.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Sure. Thanks, David. See you soon.
Yeah. Take care. See you soon. Bye.